But there's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.
On the question of the very worst violent criminals, murderers, rapists, child molesters, Senate Democrats have made the decision that they are the party that supports violent criminals. Why do I say that? Because on the floor, when I introduced an amendment to say we should not send $1,400 stimulus checks from the taxpayers to criminals currently incarcerated, to murderers, to rapists, and child molesters, every single Democrat voted no. It failed by one vote. That means every Democrat was the deciding vote, and the federal government sent millions of dollars to criminals currently incarcerated, many for horrific crimes.
There's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.
Likewise, in the Rules Committee, I had a series of amendments to strike from S1, what many are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act, the provisions to mandate that criminals and felons be allowed to vote, and in particular focused on murderers, rapists, and child molesters. And once again, you saw Senate Democrats line up over and over and over again to say they wanted to strike down the state laws that prohibit the very worst criminals from being able to vote. And now today, we're not even talking about sending money to criminals. We're not even talking about letting criminals vote. We're talking about mass murderers and rapists. Do you let them out early? Not a single Democrat on this committee is willing to say, let's not let mass murderers out early.
But there's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.
In most prior Senates, there would have been some Democrats who say, well, okay, excluding murderers, excluding rapists, maybe that has some merit. Let's find a middle ground. But post-Trump, today's Democrats don't do middle ground.
$28 trillion in debt. And somehow we're going to combat the influence of China by borrowing more money from China. Doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, but that's where we are. So we have before us a bill, but this bill simply adds more to the debt. And we say we're going to combat China through this bill, but we're going to combat China by increasing a department of government, the National Science Foundation, that is actually probably one of the most wasteful agencies in government. If you want to study cocaine, and you want to study Japanese quail using cocaine, and you want to know if they're more sexually promiscuous, the ridiculous studies that we discover, they're being voted on by people who are selected by the people doing the studies. So what they do is they select other people with ridiculous studies, and they say, we'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. So how do we get $500,000 spent studying Panamanian frogs? They want to know whether or not the mating call of the country frogs in Panama is different than the mating calls of the city frogs. That's the kind of studies that we're having coming out of here, and we don't make it any better by increasing their budget. If you are a wasteful agency and we give you more money, we'll get more waste.
But there's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.
It's been said some cats have 9 lives, but when your dad is a Democrat supported by the press, multiply that by 1,000, and you have Hunter Biden. Fresh off tossing the N-word around like one of his empty crack pipes, what does the media choose to focus on? His new life as a full-time painter.
All the things Google has done, Google is siding with the World Health Organization over anyone who disagrees with them, even though the World Health Organization obviously lied to America, obviously shills for China. Google's siding with them, YouTube is siding with them. We have the history of all the things Google has done, and the history of what happened in 2016 in the election, where they obviously, according to one of your multicultural marketing executive, tried to help Clinton.
You have my commitment. It's always been true, and we'll continue to conduct ourselves in a neutral way.
The whistleblower explained that Facebook automatically flags comments that express any concern about the coronavirus vaccine. Here's one example of what Facebook considers a Tier 1 vaccine hesitancy comment. Quote, if the vaccines are so useful, then why do we still need to wear a mask or social distance afterward? Fair question, but not allowed. Morgan Kallman is the whistleblower who exposed all of this. He's been suspended from his job at Facebook. Why would they want to ban people from asking honest questions or reporting real side effects?
They're afraid of what people might conclude if they see that other people are having negative side effects, and the users at Facebook are not aware that this is going on. If you're using Facebook or a social platform and they're censoring the content of your comments unbeknownst to you, I think that's highly immoral.
This country used to consider whistleblowing heroic.
News broke that Hunter Biden used the N-word multiple times in conversations with his attorney in 2019. The messages between Hunter and his lawyer were on Hunter's laptop laptop.
69% believe it was inappropriate for Joe Biden's son Hunter to have a role at that Ukrainian natural gas company. He had a board seat there while his father was vice president and overseeing Ukraine.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money.
Biden's son inked a $1 billion deal with the Bank of China 10 days after he and his dad visited the country.
It's okay for Biden's son to use racist slurs, and no one says a word. Not the media, no one.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent.
They quote Biden as saying that a, quote, non-orderly racial integration would cause his children to grow up in a racial jungle.
They're going to put you all back in chains. Whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black.
The actor questions why it was okay for the left to harass Donald Trump and his family, but not call out Hunter Biden for using racial slurs.
The media slamming former President Trump over his meeting back in 2018 with President Putin, while praising President Biden ahead of his showdown with the Russian leader.
My fellow Americans, this world has been turned upside down with negativity from media from the left.
Mr. Voigt warned America was in great danger when the president changes hands.
We choose truth over facts.
Another media narrative that has completely imploded about President Trump, and one of the biggest talking points the Democrats used in 2020, because they wanted to distract from the BLM riots, was that Donald Trump had cleared a bunch of peaceful protesters in Lafayette Park in order so that he could have a photo op in front of a burnt-out church.
The president forcefully clearing the streets by Lafayette Park. It turned out they were trying to clear the area so President Trump could get a photo opportunity outside of a church.
The park police themselves had said at the time, guys, we were clearing the park because people were getting violent at the time. We have like a bunch of tweets from all these people who pushed this false narrative. Daniel Dale, the official CNN fact checker, February of 2021, he tweeted out, Van der Veen falsely claims the clearing of Lafayette Square last June happened to establish an appropriate security perimeter from a riotous mob. No, they cleared peaceful protesters out of the way for a Trump photo op. Here is the actual story. The Inspector General for the Interior Department, and here is what they found. When the U.S. Park Police led law enforcement officers into a crowd of mostly peaceful protesters outside Lafayette Square on June 1st, 2020, they did so as part of a plan made days earlier to build a fence around the park to protect officers, not to facilitate the visit minutes later by President Trump to a nearby church. An Inspector General's report released Wednesday concluded. The report also found that D.C. police officers fired tear gas at protesters as they moved away from the park toward 17th Street. The park police did not deploy tear gas on June 1st, but did on previous days. But wait, we were told these were peaceful protesters.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
This is just a warning to you Trumpers. Be careful, walk lightly, and for those of you who are soldiers, make them pay.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
And they were cleared because Donald Trump wanted to walk out and hold up a Bible at St. John's Church. Nobody could explain how these peaceful protesters had burned a church 5 minutes beforehand. The media just played it to the hilt. This was part of campaign commercials for the Democrats. This was Joe Biden talking about it on the campaign trail. It was Kamala Harris lying about it on the campaign trail because it was beneficial to their narrative, which is that Donald Trump was a fascist. The narrative was not going to be good for them if it turned out that they had been fostering and backing and supporting rioters who had injured 49 police officers.
Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, has embraced every part of the equity and inclusion agenda. Lightfoot banned the police from chasing criminals, even in the case of some very serious offenses.
New stats showing police retirements have surged by 45% nationwide.
And then made excuses for those people and blamed Trump.
The president wanted this photo op, and he wanted to disperse that crowd.
And it was President Trump sending a message that he feels good about today, looking at these images. He wanted to show that he could move Americans physically out of the way to do this photo op.
Just one day after peaceful protesters were gassed so he could stage a photo op in front of St. John's Church.
If the White House president and his team had to do it all over again, would you have gassed and pummeled protesters to clear the park so the president could have a photo op?
Except that wasn't true. And We'll Meet the Press acknowledged that yesterday. It was very, very awkward.
It doesn't second guess the decision to clear the protesters. It says that the park police was within their rights. This remains an issue of controversy, but the narrative we thought we knew is not the reality.
The narrative we thought we knew is not the reality.
There's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.
When they can't solve an existential problem, they always go to the triviality as if they've done something.
Right.
Look at the Federal Reserve. We may have 6 to 7% inflation right now per annum, and we have 2.8 mortgage rates. That's a gap. And what are they doing? They're looking at pronouns. And the same thing is true with the OMB. We have a $30 trillion debt and a $1 trillion annual deficit. They don't have a clue how to handle that, but they do want to focus on these trivia. And it's also characteristic, I think, Tucker, of the left. They always want to be a cultural revolutionary. So they want to go back in the past and cancel people out and rename streets and buildings and universities and topple statues and change the language. That's what the Soviet Union did. And then they think in the present, they're starting in year zero, and then here we go in the future, that according to our plan. So the Biden administration believes that after 1,000 years of usage in the English language, they and their infinite genius have invented new words that nobody ever thought of, and therefore this is the beginning of a new paradise or utopia.
Now the term birthing people has the endorsement of the White House. At a hearing yesterday, the deputy director of Joe Biden's budget office explained that you really have to be a bigot to use the term woman.
Birthing people. I've never heard the term before. Can you explain what it means?
So we think our language needs to be more inclusive in how we deal with complex issues.
This is maybe the least complex issue ever addressed. Mothers give birth, fathers don't. Children are the product of a mother and a father. That's not politics, it's biology. And if you're forcing the rest of us to deny it, then you are a totalitarian who seeks to control reality itself. And it's not just the budget office that's doing this. This show has obtained a document from the Federal Reserve. It's a memo on bias-free language, but of course it's very biased. It instructs staffers not to use words and phrases that may be considered offensive. What's offensive? Founding fathers, man-made, and singular pronouns like he or her. Now, the Fed is controlling monetary policy. It's also totally destroying the economy, in case you haven't noticed. Why are they trying to control our language? Because they want to control our mind.
Giving an answer for a question that doesn't exist or a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, it's kind of like the Jussie Smollett syndrome. There is no victimization rampant, so they have to come up with these psychodramas so they can feel that, wow, we're a polarized society.
Many, if not most, of the very high-profile, widely publicized hate crime incidents that over the past 4 or 5 years we've seen constantly in the media. So Jussie Smollett, absolutely confident calling that a hoax. A week before that, Covington Catholic, where the original claim was that these prep school athletes had attacked and almost brutalized an elderly Native American man. Yasmin Saweed, the claim that Trump supporters ripped at her hijab. Eastern Michigan, a racialist graffiti targeting black students. Air Force Academy, where a literal general had to travel to campus to put down what initially looked like racial frictions. Grand Rapids, the young black girl pre-college who claimed that boorish white men literally urinated on her. Kean College, that's the death threats delivered to black students on a college campus. Wisconsin Parkside, that's the one with the nooses. The burnt black church in Mississippi. University of Virginia, where the claim was that the fraternities were running these sort of story of O-style anti-feminist rape rings. All of those turned out to be fake, along with roughly 500 other cases.
We're suffering from what? Prolonged adolescence. These children, they have adult bodies, but they have the minds of children. They don't want to grow up. AOC is a good example of a person who's suffering from prolonged adolescence. They just don't want to take off their training wheels and go out and experience life and its adventures and dangers.
But there's a lot of weird and stupid things going on.